Gospel for Sunday, March 29th is John chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were now just trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to his sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus already had been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but still was at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because it has been 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having always heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The Gospel of the Lord. Amen. Grace and peace to you from our Lord Jesus Christ. Today's Gospel lesson from John speaks so well into our context of the COVID-19 virus. So many people in need that are crying out, asking for help, asking for their beloved one to be healed, for their prayers to be answered. And yet sometimes, as in the case of Lazarus, the loved one dies. It seems to people that their prayers are not answered. And like Martha and Mary, when Jesus arrives, they say, or they're wanting to say, "Where were you, Jesus? We needed you. You could have saved him if you were here." Into that heartache, Jesus listens. Jesus shows compassion and is deeply moved. He cares about Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and we hear that he weeps. The grief is real. Jesus is walking beside them, knowing the pain and suffering of losing someone that you love. When Jesus asks, "Where have you laid him?" the people respond, "Come and see." Come and see, we've heard before. It's usually an invitation to come and see where God is at work. Jesus will come and see the tomb, where God is at work and will be at work in his life and death and resurrection. There is a foreshadowing of Jesus' death and resurrection in Lazarus' story. You see, Jesus will face death, suffering, pain, all for us, to reconcile us with God and to end death's final sting, that death may not keep us from God, but Jesus' resurrection gives us hope of new life. So when Jesus faces the tomb, he sees the cave, he sees the stone, he smells the stench of death. Jesus walks with us in the valley of death, and he conquered death so that we would not have to experience death's final blow. We are not vaccinated from death. We will experience death, but it cannot hold us in Jesus Christ. And this life we receive is so much more. We think of the Samaritan woman at the well who talks about water, and Jesus talks about water, everlasting water that gives life. So too, here life doesn't just mean breathing and heart beating. but it means abundant life. Jesus died on the cross so that we could have abundant life here and now, that we would not be bound by the fears and doubts and anxieties of death, but we would know that we are free to live as children of God. Jesus says, "Lazarus, come out." He calls him by name. And so we are in relationship with Jesus. We are called by name. Jesus says, unbind them and let them go. Do not let death and fear and doubt, do not let those bind them. Let them have everlasting life. Let them have abundant life here and now. What might that abundant life look like? In the Gospel of John, if we look forward to chapter 12, we see that Lazarus is reclining at table with Jesus, eating dinner and spending time together in peace and well-being. That, to me, is a beautiful picture of abundant life. And so Jesus offers us abundant life through him. We gather together as a community of faith. Now we're not gathering physically, but we gather in spirit, and we care for one another. We call each other by name. We know each other, and we reach out with care. In these days, I've heard so many calls and phone calls and messages and cards and so many things being shared, Facebook messages, and so many different ways that people are reaching out to say, I see you, I care about you, you are valuable, and you are loved. That's part of being a community of faith. And Jesus is part of that community, our community of faith, thinking about how we share God's supper. When we come back together, we will share the bread and wine and be fed at the Lord's table. Now we feed on the word and we think of God's message, how Christ is proclaimed among us. And we share that message with one another. We share a message of hope, that death will not have the last say, that we are loved, that we are given abundant life through Jesus Christ. There is a quote I'd like to share with you from Caroline Lewis, and it helps make this clear. She says, "To believe is not an assent to faith in the resurrection of the dead, but knowledge that life and relationship with Jesus extend beyond the boundaries of death." Our relationship with Jesus deepens and grows, and nothing will keep us from the love of God. Nothing, not COVID-19, nothing.